The United Nations Secretary General is calling for an immediate ceasefire of hostilities in Sudan over the Eid al-Fitr holiday. Thousands of people are fleeing the violence in Sudan's capital as a fourth ceasefire fails between the army and the rapid support forces. Several countries are considering evacuating their citizens. Fighting between the rival groups has now lasted a week. The warring sides are blaming each other for violating the truce. They have also refused to negotiate. The World Health Organization says about 330 people have been killed and at least 3,000 injured. Those trying to leave are heading south to Gezira state, where the situation is relatively calm. Others have traveled north from Khartoum to River Nile state, where no violence is being reported. Those who remain are running out of basic supplies. Joining us now on this show to discuss the crisis in Sudan and the implications across the African continent is Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, Nigeria's former Minister of Foreign Affairs. Good morning, Prof. Thank you for joining us on the morning show.
Good morning, Dr. Abati. Good morning, Rufai. Good morning, Ayo. And Rufai, next time you are going to disappear, will you let us know so we can give you a long list of what to bring back? We are happy to see you back.
Well, Prof, that's a nice one. Even holidays now have implications. That's it.
Yes, Prof.
Quickly.
Good to see you, Prof.
But go to Sudan quickly. What do you think we're looking at in Sudan? The two generals don't want to talk. They are not listening to calls for ceasefire, not even during the Eid al-Fitr. What are we looking at? A likely civil war, perhaps.
Well, thank you very much for having me on your program this morning. We Africans are back in the news for all the wrong reasons. Usually it is bad weather conditions, it is this, it is that. And now it is two generals killing their own citizens for the sake of power. Let me say this from the very beginning. The only person who is talking about peace is the Secretary General of the United Nations. And I'm afraid is a bit naive about that, because the two generals are not interested in peace. They are fighting for power. They are fighting for control. They are fighting for who will be the richest man in Sudan, because whoever conquers the other and becomes head of the armed forces is going to have access to the minerals of which Sudan is richly endowed. Now, let's go back to the beginning of these two armed forces. In fairness, we must concede that the Sudanese armed forces is the legitimate one. They have the Sudan Defense Academy. Their officers are well trained. They go through the normal processes and they get promoted when they pass examination. The Rapid Response Force is a collection of thugs, the Janjaweed, who committed so much atrocity in Darfur. They don't get any training. They don't go to any institution. They were recruited by al-Bashir, the former president of Sudan, who was looking for people who would do the dirty work of subjugating Darfur. And so all these untrained civilians were then recruited, were armed, and they subjugated Darfur. And as compensation, he issued a decree recognizing them as a militia. The Rapid Response Force is a militia is not part of the Sudanese armed forces. He needed them as an insurance against being overthrown or being dependent upon the Sudanese army, which has always been the support base of anybody from Numeri's time who wants to rule Sudan. So they became a counterfoil to the Sudanese armed forces. Well, as things will have it, when the civilians then started their movement to get rid of al-Bashir, they had had enough of his dictatorship. The Rapid Response Force cut a deal with the Sudanese armed forces. They teamed up together, they supported the civilians, and they got rid of al-Bashir. This is the second point I am going to make. On this very program, I had drawn attention to the fact that there are times civilians allowed their putative success to go into their heads. I drew attention at that time to Burma and to Sudan, that when civilians overthrow a dictator, they should never forget that it is through the support of the armed forces. And to that extent, they shouldn't think they did it by their own superior argument or their own superior force. The Sudanese civilians have behaved like spoiled brats. They are not united. I don't even know what their program is. There's a United Nations report that says for every 5 Sudanese, you will get 5 different opinions on how the Sudan should proceed. Every time the military came up with a plan to disengage, some of the civilians will agree, the others will get onto the streets. I'm sorry if I sound a bit harsh, but when I now look at all of them running away from the streets, people coming on television and crying, I ask, where were you when these same streets were filled with flags by different groups, professional of medical people, professional of journalists, professional of this, professional of that, confronting the military? And now the military has turned upon itself. And what is the basis of this? They both agree that the Rapid Response Force will be integrated with the Sudanese Armed Forces during the transition. But who will be the commander-in-chief? That is really where the disagreements are. Will it be the general commanding the Sudanese Armed Forces, or will it be the self-styled general who never went to any military school commanding the Rapid Response Force, who will be the commander-in-chief? This is what all this problem is all about. So when people call, that everybody is reading from the same page for peace because of the Eid festival, I'm sorry, the two generals are they know what they are fighting for. They know what they are fighting about. There are about 5 million Nigerians there. When I read yesterday that Nigeria is making plans to evacuate Nigerians who are in the Sudan, I said 5 million? Because you see, the Sudan had always been the middle point of Nigerians in those days who were going across the desert to Mecca. Some got as far as the Sudan and couldn't go any further, so they stopped and settled there. Some got to Mecca. On their way back, they couldn't proceed any further. They stopped in the Sudan and settled there. So there are about 5 million Nigerians,
Yes.
and whatever affects Sudan. Because if Sudan disintegrates, we are going to get a spillover of refugees or immigrants or whatever you want to call them, flowing across Chad and flowing into northern Nigeria. And these people will be some of the rapid response forces, again, who will be well armed. If you remember what happened to us after Gaddafi was overthrown in Libya.
Yes.
So to that extent, what is happening in Sudan should be of paramount interest to us in Nigeria.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Professor Akinyemi, because my question was going to be around foreign interest interventions and your assessment of how well this has played out or affected the war in, or what's going on in Sudan. As you rightly mentioned, there could potentially be a spillover, and it wouldn't bode very well for countries, neighboring countries, including Nigeria. However, there are also interests from other countries. We know that gold, which is the highest exported mineral in Sudan, is of interest to countries like Saudi Arabia, to Russia, to the United States. How do you assess their response so far, and do you think they could do more in managing the crisis in Sudan?
Ayo, thank you very much for that question. Actually, that's one factor that was missing in my analysis, which I should have included. The Rapid Response Force has become, if you like, the Arab or African mercenary force in that part of the world. They are paid by Saudi Arabia to come and fight in Yemen. So you have some of the Rapid Response Forces Brigade fighting in Yemen on the side of Saudi Arabia. Fortunately, and thank God, that Yemen war is winding down. And that again frees those who had fought there to become engaged somewhere else. You'll be surprised to also know that the European Union is also paying the Rapid Response Forces elements to patrol, you see, the southern part of Sudan juts into the Sahara Desert. It's a vast area, not controlled by anybody. So the European Union pays the Rapid Response Force to use its forces to help control immigrant flow from south of the Sahara, trying to get to the Mediterranean and trying to get to Europe. And they don't care how the Rapid Response Forces, handle that assignment. They can kill the immigrants, they can turn them back, they can do anything as long as they stop the flow. So they pay them. Then the Rapid Response Force controls, as you have rightly pointed out, areas of gold, diamond, lithium, and what have you, which are actually present in Darfur and in the western part of Sudan. The general controlling the Rapid Response Force exports these minerals and to wherever they are wanted, whether it is in Russia or Europe or India, wherever. And the money does not go into the central purse of Sudan, it goes into the pocket of the general. So he has enough money to pay his boys. But the Sudanese army is very well trained. And that is why, when you have a conflict like this, listen very carefully to who is saying what. Whoever is calling for intervention and peace is because he's losing the battle. And the Rapid Response Force is losing the battle. Whoever says we don't want external intervention is because he's winning the war. and the general of the Sudanese armed forces is the one telling the United Nations Secretary General, we don't want external forces, we don't want external intervention. The Sudanese themselves can handle this matter, is because he is the one who is on top right now. You know, we need to be careful in making our judgments and our assessments. It's not because people are bloody-minded. When you call for a ceasefire, the combatants know that each side is going to use the ceasefire to regroup, re-strengthen its own section of the armed forces, and start the battle after the 3 days of Eid or 1 week of the ceasefire. Therefore, they are not stupid to allow a ceasefire when there are no agreements on the basic issues, that are involved. But unfortunately for Sudan, there are so many external forces that have never left Sudan alone. Egypt has never left it alone. Egypt is on the side of the Sudanese armed forces. That's never left it alone. I've pointed out the European Union. I've pointed out Saudi Arabia. And believe me, where Saudi Arabia is involved, don't look too far for Israel. It won't be directly, but it will have its own forces, its own supporters that will be there. The United States is there. The United States is always everywhere because it's a global power. And all these external forces don't have the same program, and yet they all have their supporters that they are supporting with arms, with money, and what have you.
Okay, sir. Truth has to be told, it has now become an international playground at the expense of the Sudanese people. The West is there, they are playing. The Russians are definitely there, because we all know before now they've been getting gold from Dagalo and his people. The Russians have been operating big time in Sudan. Some Egyptian troops were arrested recently, by Dagalo's forces. Those were the troops that were fighting alongside the Sudanese army. They were arrested. Egypt is there. America is there. Anthony Blinken is speaking and all of that. But while all of this happened, the humanitarian crisis, the Sudanese people, what becomes of them in all of this madness between Bonham and Dagalo? Because it's just replica of what happened between Riek Machar and Salva Kiir. And the funny thing is that after John Garang fought for the independence of South Sudan, two of them went rogue. It's exactly what is happening. After Omar al-Bashir left the scene, Bonham and Dagalo are at each other. What happens then to the Sudanese people? Should they go and die because two people are fighting for power? Secondly, let's talk about the impending Sudan that might happen within. We have seen terrorist group get empowered and emboldened in Nigeria. Hope we're not going to wake up one morning in this country and see Russian MiG jets flying in cities, dropping bombs at enemy targets. Yorubas have a saying, "Umbo umbo awala dedi." Are we not getting to that point now in this country?
Thank you, Rufai. I've been in this game of being an analyst for almost 50 years now. Unfortunately, the civilians don't count when big political and military forces are involved. I'm so sorry to say that, but that is the honest truth. Look at how many civilians died in the Russian Civil War or in the Bolshevik War, as we know it, between the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks, or between the Red Army and the Royal Army. Look how many millions of Russians died. How about the American Civil War? How many people died in the war between the North and the South? And of course, before people say, you know, Falana, take care of your own, let me also say how many Nigerians died during the Nigerian Civil War. Please, in case there are people who don't understand that reference to Falana, I'm not referring to Falana, the SCN, but, you know, the Yorubas have a saying, mind your own business before, you know, you start minding the business of other people. It's a play on words. But the civilians are always the losers. Unfortunately, this is what we should just accept. There's nothing we can do about it. Those who play the game are those who are armed with the armed forces. We can speak from now until kingdom come about how the civilians are going to suffer. They will always suffer. But in this case of Sudan, the civilians are not innocent, as I have pointed out in my earlier remarks. Because, as I said, they've behaved like spoilt brats, always on the streets, always dividing among themselves. If I have to tell you what happened, you know, in the days of Nadeko, the division amongst us as different groups came in with their own agenda, I've always held that, you know, God was just on the side of just on the side of Nadeko. You've raised the issue of what I will call Nigerians not taking Nigeria seriously. You know, Nigeria is not a banana republic. Nigeria has so many resources, and there are so many international vultures who have their eyes on these resources and who know that because, again, of the cleavages amongst ourselves, we are not serious about protecting our resources. There are several sections of Nigeria that will rather form alliances with external forces to get a crack at these mineral resources, just to prevent, you know, any other party in Nigeria from having access to it. They will even in any case, our definition of Nigeria is still one that we need to settle. We need to sit down around a table and have a good conversation among ourselves. We tried it at the 2014 National Conference, because it is when every sector of Nigeria has a share of the cake, not only in cutting it, but in making it that all Nigerians will then see that they have a vested interest in keeping outsiders out. But a situation where it's only, or there's this perception that it is only a section of Nigeria that decides who bakes the cake, who does the distribution, then there will always be people who will prefer to deal with non-Nigerians. So you are right, but we're not taking ourselves seriously. I am one of those, and my students from University of Ibadan in the 70s who are now retired, they keep in touch with me, and they keep reminding me that, sir, from the 1970s, you've been saying that, you know, Nigeria could be a regional actor, but when would this be? And I said, well, I mean, it's not. When I was a minister, I tried my best, and yet I know the kind of flack I got from, surprisingly, Nigerian students, Nigerian lecturers, that I was thinking too big for Nigeria, and I should have my head examined. But I'm not going to give up on Nigeria. Nigeria is just too big for us to allow it to go to places. For each one of us, we have something to gain in resolving the problems that face Nigeria. And we should learn the lesson of Sudan. We should learn the lesson of Ethiopia, how they tried to set up Tigray versus the Ethiopian government. And we should learn the lesson of how people set up Africans against each other before again they come back to Nigeria to have a crack at us.
Well, Prof, Japan, Uganda, Tanzania, these are countries that are already evacuating their people out of Sudan. Now, the Nigerian embassy in Sudan says it has opened a register. Over 1,000 Nigerian students are ready to be evacuated. The embassy says it's monitoring the situation and that it's not ruling out evacuation. For how long should the government of Nigeria continue to monitor the situation before evacuation begins? What will be your advice, both to the foreign ministry and the embassy, the Nigerian embassy in Sudan?
Well, I think that if we are just going to put the plan into operation, it's a bit late. As I said earlier, we have about 5 million Nigerians in the Sudan. Any embassy worth its salt, faced with that, should have had a plan of evacuation in place. Now, I'm not blaming the embassy because I know the problem facing all our embassies: lack of resources, lack of funds from headquarters. It's possible that the ambassador might have sent in a blueprint 3 years ago and he got no reply from the headquarters. That's really what tends to happen. But now in this case, it's actually between the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Dabiri's Diaspora Commission. Again, when you have an item that is divided between the two, you end up not having anything done as people fight for jurisdictional position. In the past, we succeeded, and we are still evacuating people from Libya. We are still evacuating people from Tunisia. So I won't be surprised. We are very good when it comes to the real crisis. We are very good actually at in the last minute scoring a few good goals. So air peace, and a few other of the airlines, will probably step up, and give us a good runs in evacuating people, and hope they get paid, or at least get recognized for this, national duties that they often do for us.
Well, on that note, we'd like to thank you very much, Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, for joining us on the morning show. Thank you very much indeed.